I don't tell this story to frighten people for sport. I tell it because it's true, true in the way that leaves you watching shadows for weeks, true in the way knives of doubt never quite fall from your hands. I tell it because silence kept me stuck for years, and silence felt worse than being called a liar. If you've read other legends and shrug, if you think shapeshifters are only for ghost stories, listen to mine. I lived with one. I walked away, but it followed me home in ways I couldn't name at first. The first thing I remember clearly is a voice. It called my name from just beyond the porch light, soft and exactly like my mother's. It didn't scream or shout. It coaxed, the tone of somebody who knows the secret place you hide grief. The dogs were gone quiet, even the tumbleweed seemed to hold its breath. I opened the door because I'm stupid that way. Faith or foolishness, call it what you will. There was no one in the yard. When I stepped out, the voice came again, but now it was closer. It said my name in a way that made my insides thin and cold. I walked to the fence line, and the call stopped. I turned back to the house, and something heavy shifted in the brush, the sound of paws that weren't quite canine. The thing at the edge of the light looked like a coyote from far off, but its shoulders were wrong to human. Its eyes were like oil on glass with a tiny human glint. It cocked its head, mimicked my mother's voice one last time, and then let out a sound that was half laugh, half animal, and it ran. I never trusted the night again after that. When I first began asking, the stories were a closed book. The people who raised me on that land were a tight-mouthed lot, farmers, ranch hands, school teachers who had learned to keep the old stories out of their mouths in public. Skinwalkers, Yinal are a subject the elders only speak about in the warmth of a kitchen with the oven on and the curtains drawn. I sat with an elder once on the far edge of the reservation, and I asked about them straight out. He sank deeper into his chair and shook his head. "We do not speak the names you think," he said quietly. "There are things inside words," he told me reluctantly, and not without warning, that a skinwalker is someone who chooses to cut his ties to the old law, who uses power to hurt rather than heal. He said the word is a weight, the story is a warning. The tales vary with every teller. Some insist a skinwalker is a witch who dons skins and runs on for limbs. Others say it is a spirit that takes forms to test you. The old teaching was consistent, though. Do not follow a voice that is not yours. Do not chase answers inside the dark. I was not a believer when I first decided to go looking. I was a curious fool, a freelance writer with a notebook, a camera, and a stubborn need to know why the people down at the junction had stopped driving out after dusk. Look, I'll admit it, I had the arrogance of the unafraid. I told myself that the land and the sky had been telling the same stories for centuries, that if there was anything of truth in the whispers, it would be something to document, to translate, to make a feature out of. I wanted interviews, I wanted grainy footage. I wanted the thrill of disproving superstition. I rented a weathered house near Skinwalker Ranch because everyone else had stories about the ranch and its strange lights, and because the ranch sat on the edge of the reservation like an unhealed scar. I thought, set up cameras, leave mix rolling, go to bed, collect data. I stayed for weeks. I learned to move around that place like a man trying to keep steady on a boat. If you think the attraction was only professional, you're wrong. There was also the pull of a place that rearranged your assumptions. The way the stars sat in the sky there felt different, as if someone had moved a light. Old roads that showed up on no map. Dogs that would not enter a certain 100-yard stretch. People who refused to speak the names of the hills at night. The first week was small and stupid noises. My dog, a loud, brave mutt named Huck, refused to go out after late. He would stand at the door and tremble at something invisible on the wind. Chickens slowed down, as if the air had grown thick and slow, their pecks hesitant. One morning I found a circle of feathers around the coop, all intact, all arranged as if set there deliberately. No blood, nothing torn, I felt like I had walked into a man's house and found every chair turned to face the wall. There were tracks, too, but not simple paw prints. I found long, narrow indentations that looked like fingers dug into the earth, then a skid, then a sudden end where the prints dissolved into nothing. Once near the arroyo, I found a set of prints that started on all fours and shifted to upright halfway through, as if whatever moved across that stretch put on shape and then wore it off. These are little things to someone who comes for proof. For me, at first, they were annoyances, then they became enough to keep me awake. It was 3 a.m. I had been up because the place sounded like it was moving, low creaks and distant bellows I would later learn come from the wind working on sparse trees. My recorder had snippets of static and a pattern of distant knocks, nothing clean. I was in the kitchen, trying to keep my hands busy, when I heard something trot across the gravel. Huck responded with a sound that was equal parts whine and bark. The lights were out. I shuffled to the door and peered into the dark. There, under the weak spread of the moon, a figure stood where the fence met the scrub. For a heartbeat, it was only a coyote, back hunched, ears keen. Then it straightened in a way that made my stomach drop. Its shoulders lengthened, its spine arched awkwardly. The skull tilted, and the face that looked back at me was to thin, the jaw to flexible, moving in ways no normal animals could. And then the eyes, they were far too human, rimmed with that odd yellow I'd only seen in someone who'd been awake 4 too many nights. The creature opened its mouth, and out came my sister's laugh from years ago, the laugh she used when she wanted to get me into trouble. I stumbled back and slammed the door. Huck flattened against my legs, teeth bared, but his jaw shook as if he could not decide between attacking and fleeing. Behind the wall of wood, I could hear the thing moving, the soft scrape of bones sliding over one another like furniture being shifted. The next day, a neighbor told me a story about hearing a woman call his name on the mesa some months before. When he investigated, he found his wheelbarrow turned over and no sign of anyone. He looked at me when I told him what I'd heard, and his eyes went small, as if a memory had snapped. I did everything you probably think a rational man shouldn't. I set up more cameras, I left lights on, I sat outside with a flashlight and a handgun resting on my knees. The cameras filled with nothing but static at the times I later found were the worst, 2 o'clock to 3:30 a.m. The witching hour where the world seems to thin. It was not only sound, though. There were times when the air itself felt like an accusation, thick, metallic. My phone once died for a solid hour. The battery read 0 even when warmed. Batteries would drain in record time, compasses spun, and clocks lost and regained minutes like bad breathing. Equipment failed in ways that no technician could account for. These things happened on Skinwalker Ranch, and some people called them anomalies. I called them the place reminding me it did not like me. Worst of all was the mimicry. On 3 separate nights someone called my name from the arroyo, in my voice, in the voice of my father, in the cracked voice of my first teacher. Each time I went hunting for a human answer, a neighbor, a lost hiker, and each time found only the wind and the medicine scrub and the feeling of being laughed at by something that had worn a face. One night I found fresh handprints pressed into the kitchen door, vertical lines of pressure like fingers dragging down the varnish. The prints were too narrow for any living man in this county. They cooled the skin on my palms when I put my hand over them, as if the door had been scratched by something that had been outside time. You've heard the name, Skinwalker Ranch. It has its own legends and its own practitioners, men who come with scopes and journals, men who want to make a science of fear. I met a team once. They were polite, efficient, and their notebooks trembled when they spoke. They showed me a grainy clip of what looked like an animal elongated and then gone, as if it had been unzipped from the fabric of the night. They described lights that hovered and then blinked out, and the sense that someone, something, was watching. There is a coat of myth over the ranch, stories of holes in time, machines that go offline, and animals found in places they could not logically appear. I can't say whether those accounts were exaggerated for the record or true and messy and terrifying. I can say that my own instruments gave me readings that made technicians frown, interruptions in electromagnetic fields, brief but violent shifts in background radiation that returned to baseline without cause. That pattern lines up with witness testimony that the place acts like a lens, concentrating and then erasing phenomena. For a while, I tried to be reasonable. Coyotes do move oddly sometimes, batteries die. The human brain finds pattern, but when you pile experiences on top of each other, a logic not written in textbooks starts to grow. You begin to see the shape behind the shape. I started looking into the older explanations, not to find horror but to seek context. The Navajo elders spoke of rules. Do not pursue a voice beyond the line of the mesa. Do not mock the old songs. Do not flout the taboo of naming the thing. Some of those rules seemed superstitious at first, then necessary. Those who broke them paid a price, not always immediate, and not always visible the way a bruise is visible. Sometimes the price is a slow intrusion, nightmares that do not stop, a hunger you cannot explain, a sense that doors open with an outside push. There are other explanations. Of course, some locals said skinwalkers are people exploiting fear. Men in animal pelts to frighten rivals, to steal cattle, to claim land. Others suggested psychological contagion. When a community shares a story, the story can manifest in behaviors and perceptions. And there are more extraordinary views. A researcher I spoke to once suggested a link between skinwalker reports and other anomalies worldwide: lights, poltergeist activity, objects appearing and vanishing. He hinted at something that could reach into different forms, a topology of the uncanny where physical laws are loose. I kept that conversation in a drawer in my head like a dangerous page. The night that stayed with me began like many of the others, battering cold even in summer, the kind of dark that rests like a wet cloth. I was exhausted, bone-tired from weeks of thin sleep. I'd caught myself calling my missing brother's name in the day, an old reflex, and I'd laugh and scold myself for it. That night, just past midnight, someone called my full name in the exact cadence my brother had used when he wanted to share something private. It was intimate. It was wickedly familiar. I answered, thinking for a moment it could be him, come back the way some people do in stories. The voice said, "Come on," like you used to down by the arroyo. The voice was perfect. Every uncleared hurt, every forgiveness I'd withheld, every small shame I'd held was wrapped inside that call. I grabbed the shotgun because courage without a weapon is only a small madness, and I walked out. The night ate the light from the porch as if the darkness took its toll with interest. The arroyo smelled like overturned dirt. The moon had slid behind a cloud. I found footprints, human, barefoot, large, leading into the wash. They stopped halfway and continued as three-toed impressions, like a man who had slipped into a different gate. I followed. The prints led to a small sunken spot where the earth had been leveled as if by something very heavy. There was no body. There was only a mark on the soil, and then a sensation in the air like being watched by eyes to many. I felt hands press against the back of my neck, invisible but real. I turned, gun raised, and whatever looked at me was not fully formed, only a suggestion of limbs, a smear of teeth, and eyes. For a single breath, I saw my brother's face laid over the thing's skull. Then it moved in a way like oil poured slow, and it was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I drove at first light, the truck's tires throwing up dust because staying was a permission slip to madness. I left notes and a camera behind. When I returned weeks later with a team, the camera's card had been wiped clean. There was an unreadable smear of static, and in the metadata a 20-second gap where the device recorded nothing. I left the place after that, more out of a sense of self-preservation than anything noble. My hands trembled less after I moved, but the tremor never left me fully. I have different dreams now. I wake sometimes to the sound of someone trying to fit my name into their mouth. I find myself pausing at doorways and listening for voices that are not there. On more than one occasion, a friend has sent me a clip of a dog crouching at the threshold, head cocked as if listening to something on the wind. My replies to them are short now. I do not want to coax it into speech. The elders were right. Speaking the name feels dangerous. It feels as if the more you say it, the more the night hears you, but silence was no cure either. I carried my shame, curiosity, and evidence like a weight that moved other things closer to light. Sometimes I wonder if other people get to keep their nights the way they used to. Some who grew up in the place learn how to live with it. They put out offerings, they sing, they mark boundaries. Others leave and do not return. For myself, the story is a small scar that still itches. I used to want to explain everything. I still want to explain it. But now I hold theories like fragile glass, beautiful, dangerous to drop. One theory is the simplest. People shape a shared fear into a shared shape. Story becomes reality. The phenomenon at the ranch could be caused by electromagnetic anomalies affecting human perception, producing hallucinations, draining batteries, creating odd tracks when people are not watching. Another is cultural. The Skinwalker is a social caution and embodied taboo that keeps people from certain dangerous behaviors. The more the story is told, the more people notice ambiguous things and attribute them. A harder idea is that something uses forms to interact with our minds. Maybe it is a biological mimic or a creature evolved to imitate human sounds and gestures to survive. Maybe it is something else, something that feeds on response and attention. I do not have enough evidence for any of these to say I know. But what I do know is the way a voice can make you cross a desert at midnight. I know how home can be used like bait. I know that the gap between human and animal is sometimes a thin scrap of skin. If you expected a monster to growl in the dark, raw and visible, that's not how it looked for me. It wore faces like gloves. It used the trust you had in a loved one to draw you out. It made instruments fail at the precise moment you needed a light. It found the guilt and the words you'd buried and arranged them so you would answer. The terror was not only what it did to the world, it was what it did to memory. I don't know if I scared it off or if it ever let go. Sometimes, on a windy night, I hear a laugh on the line of the air and I imagine it standing far beyond the last bend of road, wearing my grandfather's gait. That is the part that changes you, not the story's flashpoint, but the slow erosion of certainty. If you take one thing from this, let it be this: don't follow the voice that sounds like someone you love when you're alone in the dark. Close the door. Keep the lights on if you must. Listen to elders when they say no. If this account unsettled you or opened a new question, leave a like and subscribe if you want more long-form encounters like this. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever heard a voice in the night that wasn't there? Do you think skinwalkers are myth, misperception, or something worse? Thank you for hearing me. If nothing else, take care tonight, lock your doors. And when the voice calls, remember, not every familiar sound is friendly.